So, all right, we're recording. So, ni hao, hello, hola. Thank you for joining us again. We have another episode where today we will be talking about capitalism. Today we have some more gentlemen from the SAE fraternity. We have Luke, Cyrus, and Travis with us today. So please join me in giving them a big welcome and let's start talking about some topics. Okay, so like I mentioned today, we're talking about capitalism, and I know money is a big part of our world in general. So I just want to ask you guys, start off just a real basic, really general question. What do you think the purpose of capitalism is in the first place? Like, why do we have money?
That's a great question. I think it's all about society, and money was a product of necessity when people decided that trading in terms of goods and services was not going to work on such a large scale. So that's where the idea of currency, that's where it comes from. I think now money is part of certainly Western way of life in a big way because of the capitalist system. And the capitalist system, um, it allowed the United States to develop very quickly. And I think now we're just seeing the late stages of it and what that does to people. So
I think Cyrus gave a great answer. When I was like 10 on an airplane once, I saw this like movie where instead of currency, people bought things with like the time they had on Earth. It was, I don't remember the name of the movie, but it was a really it was a really corny sci-fi old movie. Basically, instead of money, people would buy, like when they buy their coffee, they would like lose like 10 minutes off their life or something. It was really a grim kind of tale.
I saw the trailer for that once. I think I know what you're talking about.
Was it
Yeah.
like, did they have like time on their hands?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Really hokey. But I think like Cyrus's point, like you can trade things up to a certain point, but then it doesn't become practical. Like some people obviously don't want to trade small things over time for things that they're going to eat. So they're not getting things they can keep forever. You can't really trade food once you like eat the food, obviously. Same thing with big things too. Like if you want to make a big purchase with a car, it's pretty hard to kind of take out a loan when you're trading. It just doesn't really make sense. There isn't anything you can kind of do there. So money is a great
loans
way.
are kind of impossible using a barter system.
Yeah. I think money is a great medium. It's accessible to, I would say, a lot of people, but it also eliminates kind of a lot of hurdles with the bartering and trading system.
Yeah. And just to like jump on this, I think one thing money has gone from is that substitution of this is possibly a better system for bartering, or better than bartering, and it's turned into this, like what Cyrus was mentioning, like this societal tool. And what we're seeing now is people are perceiving their own self-worth and their own um, abilities in their like current system, uh, through wealth and through the amount of money that they have or their parents have or the people around them have. And I think it's gone from this system that possibly had less implications of your own property to more of a defining trait.
But yeah, I totally agree. Luke, it has really become more prevalent in terms of what you do. But I also think that money can exist separately as a tool from capitalism.
Definitely.
Because I think money itself is not inherently, a negative thing. It's a tool, like we said. Like it allows incredible things through economies, and so really, I think capitalism is what leads to people or some people or organizations having so much money while other people and organizations have so little, and that inequity and imbalance is really, I think, the problem. You are muted right now.
I'm really glad you brought that up. That really just leads into my next question. I love it when you guys just talk and it helps me move along. So my next question is, as you mentioned, some people do benefit more than others. what stakeholders do you think benefit most from capitalism? Would it be the big industries like Facebook, or is it like the little mom and pop shops that, because supposedly everyone is supposed to have a chance to prevail with capitalism if you work hard, but then there are these monopolizing factors. So like a mom and pop coffee shop isn't gonna get the same opportunity as like say a Starbucks, or if a Starbucks moves in next to them, their clientele is gonna go down. So who do you think benefits most from capitalism, and do you think that was done on purpose?
I'll start off by saying I think capitalism in theory allows like anyone to grow their business as they see fit. Obviously, you've got competition and things like that. But for the mom and pop, if they want to make an empire of coffee shops, I mean, that is how Starbucks started. They have the choice to do that. And if they play their cards right, they can do that. However, I would say it's much easier when you have wealth and have resources at your disposal to grow at an exponential rate of speed. You guys know I'm big into the aviation industry, and a common joke in the aviation industry is if you want to start an airline and make millions in the airline industry, you first have to be a billionaire. So that's kind of what it is. If you want to make a large industry and gain a lot of wealth off that, you have to have a lot of resources to begin with. So that's an area where it's really inaccessible for a lot of people because they might not have the resources to go into those areas and develop the skills and the products and things at that rate of speed that they kind of desire. Obviously, you can go get funding for that, but it's always a crapshoot, and there's a lot of what ifs. It's never guaranteed. Really, Cyrus or Luke chime in as well, see if they have any other inputs.
I think one thing that might be good is if we kind of like narrow down what capitalism means. Like capitalism is a very, very broad topic, I think you could say. And so what are we exactly talking about when we talk about capitalism, right? Are we talking about like Adam Smith and the invisible hand, and that the market should just be allowed to find the best solution? So no government regulation of the economy. Like, are we talking about that form of capitalism? Or are we talking about the kind of lower tax brackets that we have in the United States compared to a lot of other countries, and the reduction in public service that we have because of that? These are questions that I think we could answer, but it would help us to narrow down what we're talking about.
I think for this specific conversation we're having now, we could probably just focus more like the whole tax bracket concept for just for right now, just so we can kind of not dig deep into the rabbit hole. We just kind of want to do the basics, and then if it comes to it, we could definitely have later on conversations in other podcasts.
So capitalism as compared with like socialism in Europe. Cool.
Or elsewhere. I think one thing we should also define besides what capitalism is the limits upon which governments put on its people in terms of possible inequities that they sorry, my entire house just walked in. What I'm thinking about right now is after World War II, there's something called the GI Bill. And the GI Bill introduced the ability for veterans to have loans to be able to acquire houses throughout our country and start building their wealth. And within that, they blocked African Americans who fought in World War II from acquiring the same type of loans that white veterans did acquire. And what I'm thinking about here is how capitalism is a structure that is free market and doesn't have necessarily a ton of government oversight, but the government is the largest rule producer within capitalism, where certain government programs and certain government oversight can dictate how capitalism forms and shapes throughout like United States history or a history of the world. So I think another thing to understand,
even like contemporarily, like there's an antitrust lawsuit. The Justice Department just opened an antitrust lawsuit against Google. So
yeah. So I think an important thing is to understand that certain parties have been allowed to grow wealth and certain parties have not been allowed to grow wealth. And that is not necessarily any one of our faults, but it is necessarily the fault of the system that we are in that allows for capitalism to persist.
So I'm glad you guys are bringing up great points, and a couple of you have mentioned like inequalities, and I don't know, you just kind of talked about government, and also going back to the whole tax bracket thing, how there's inequalities within that. I just want to bring up some kind of a general question to you guys. So capitalism has been around for a very long time, we could say, but then like some might say that our nation was built on like capitalistic views, right? But then our nation was also built on some very racist views. So I was wondering if you guys think that that could be detrimental to one another if the country was built on both of these ideals. Did racism kind of feed into capitalism? And then how did some of these racist leaders, some of these people who had power, how did they use that, their racism and this idea of capitalism, to kind of set aside some people, create that inequality? And just some examples that I feel like definitely show how the system kind of messed up a lot of things and created a lot of inequalities. One that we can see a lot in a lot of places now, especially I'm from Oakland, so especially in Oakland, we can see how gentrification is a huge problem. And then that can correlate back to like redlining and just examples like this, where the system created a problem where low income people can't necessarily thrive. So how do you guys think that connection between a racist nation starting off kind of racist and a capitalistic nation connect, and how might that be a problem? And is it fixable if you think so, or do we have to just completely,
That was quite a question.
Yeah, that is quite possibly the biggest question I've heard in a minute. I will kick us off real quick. I think there needs to be the separation between what capitalism is and what capitalism should be. Like the ideology of capitalism just is that people are making their own choices privately with their wealth that they acquire through personal transactions, that then lets them do whatever they want, right? And I think what we're connecting here is there is a connect between the government focusing their principles and policy towards allowing specifically white landowners early on to grow their wealth faster than what at the time were slaves. And I think capitalism is the best policy in terms of dealing with how to grow wealth, which we can get into the environmental conversation later. But I do think that we are seeing right now a capitalism that is fueled by racism that was built into our Constitution, but is not necessarily imperfect in a way. I think there's a lot of really strong things about capitalism that sometimes we tend to forget about.
Yeah, I mean, to build off of that, I think in theory, capitalism is a perfect system, right? Like you have the freedom to and security to do what you want with your property and to work for other property and to accumulate wealth. But obviously, it's not a perfect system. Communism also sounds great in a perfect world where you just all share and everyone has everything they need because everyone pools all their resources. But that's not actually how it ever materializes. And so, like, the reality is that this nation is a racist nation, and it has been for almost its entire life, continuing now. And when capitalism is tied into that, it inherently makes it less free and less capitalism, because not everyone has the same opportunities as everyone else. I mean, literally everyone who is white has this privilege that anybody of color doesn't have. And that's just this pipeline to success. And so how can we call ourselves capitalists when even there is so much elitism and so much racism institutionalized and systematically? Like, it's not possible for everyone to do this, not setting aside money. So I think that is something that the United States really needs to figure out. And I don't know, I don't think there is a solution necessarily, except just to educate more and more of the population to as high a standard as possible. But I have no idea. I think either way, we'll see some sort of shift or change in the United States culture during our lifetime.
Yeah, that's great. And like thinking back, like when the country was founded, the founders were like, "Oh, capitalism is great. It lets anyone accumulate wealth and everything." But obviously, some people try and game the system, and they'll use it to their advantage. And of course, someone will get thrown under the bus, and obviously, um, certain groups will be more marginalized than others. And you've seen that repeated throughout history. Different groups, different neighborhoods, like you said, is in Oakland. Gentrification, things like that. There's neighborhoods there's obviously people who will benefit from it, the rich people who move in, and then obviously the people who's been in those neighborhoods for years, decades, get forced out, which is not good. And I think what's important now is I think people are taking a little more notice on ethics and kind of rules. And I think that's perpetrated because of social media. News travels really, really quickly. You got Twitter, you got Instagram. So people, like, I just remember like the Volkswagen emissions scandal. That really probably 50 years ago, I don't think I would have ever, if I was my age, I probably wouldn't have cared about it. You might read it in a business journal, but I know everyone knew about it. It was a big headline when it came out, that people like lied and covered it up. And because people are active and they're engaged in these social issues, I think leaders in business, as well as anyone else, needs to watch what they say, watch what they do, because people now can easily whistleblow or blow the whistle on certain things. And news travels instantly now. So it's like you can't cover things up, that you can't really cover a leak. Once it's out, it's out. So that's a good thing, because I think it will help people kind of check their ego at the door and say like, oh, does this seem right? Does this seem wrong? Companies now have been really good about forthcoming about their kind of past mistakes, which is also good. I think some of them need to do a lot more work than others. Just apologizing isn't really enough. That's a whole nother conversation. But the fact that people are looking into their past and seeing how they got to where they are is a step in the right direction.
I think oh.
I was just going to quickly say that social media in its own right is a huge conversation, just based on the impacts that it's had on America in the last 20 years. I mean, the United States is such a different place 20 years ago to today. So
even 6 months ago.
Yeah,
I definitely agree. I think, Travis, kind of building off your point, Jeff Bezos recently donated $10 billion to this climate action fund that Amazon and Blue Star Origin were like co-creating to like help create this $10 billion nest egg, more or less, that would help local and domestic environmental groups start succeeding in their mission statements. And I think one thing we may have left out here, which I, as an EPDM major or minor at this school, I always love bringing in climate change. Capitalism has really got the United States working towards a goal of becoming the wealthiest and most developed country in the world. And through that, we have created quite a problem. The United States is possibly associated with 20 to 25% of the world's carbon pollution through our own like activities. And I think right now we're seeing a very similar thing that Travis was talking about with understanding morals and ethics within businesses. We're also seeing the understanding that Amazon's business model is built around quickly flying packages around the world to their locations as quick as possible, delivering them and repeating every day. So we're seeing capitalism that fueled a growth within our nation, a very carbon intensive growth that is now kind of looking back and saying, oh crap, like we grew very quickly and we grew very efficiently, but we created this mess on our hands. And I think they're understanding that now more so than in any time in the past. We've been talking about climate change more or less since the 90s, and it's finally reaching corporate responsibility standards of them being on top of their own climate impacts, because social media is definitely a big factor in that.
I'm glad that Luke brought up the relationship between capitalism and the environment, because I think it's a really good case model for how capitalism is really good for making a country really wealthy as quickly as possible if you follow it. But it does not take into account all the other aspects of life and existence besides money, like the environment, like people, like people being able to function properly, like the interrelationships between cultures. All those things are not taken into account when capitalism comes around. And so I think that is a very big weakness of the system.
I'm glad you guys are bringing up these externalities, because obviously almost everything has externalities, right? And I'm glad you brought up climate change. And Cyrus, I'm glad you brought up just the externalities that are imposed on people, which leads me to my next question: is, do you, let's say we're in a perfect world, right? Or a more perfect world where there isn't racism, how do you think capitalism would affect people's ability to be empathetic towards others? So I don't know if you've seen the movie The Founder. It's about the beginning of McDonald's, and basically this guy made a deal with the original owners of McDonald's, but then as he started making money, as he made it a brand name, as he made it huge, kind of money corrupted him and he screwed them over and really didn't show any empathy. And in a lot of social media and a lot of large media, we see how power and money can potentially corrupt someone. So how do you think, or why do you think that is?
I would like to quickly point out, I agree with everything you just said, and I think it should be taken to another level of where socialism and communism are both economic models where governments control private equity and private property in a lot of forms. Ultimately, the decision makers are people as well, and that's why we see corruption throughout our world, because people are inherently trusted to spend billions of dollars from the tip of Africa to the tip of Alaska, right? Like every single person is challenged with this concept of I have a lot of power, which more or less money is, and I can make a lot of decisions with it. And I think it goes beyond capitalism, because we're seeing the same mistakes being made either in governments or in private corporations in the United States or in a socialist country like Norway. Like these problems are, so I guess I agree with what your question is standing for, because it's boiling down to a human problem, not necessarily an ideology problem.
I watched last week. I watched A Social Network for the first time, which is about the founding of Facebook. Jesse Eisenberg plays Mark Zuckerberg and talks about like the early days when they were in Harvard and how he built it up with his roommates. And the big focal point of the movie was Zuckerberg's best friend, his roommate, had a lot of money from his investment trading. And Zuckerberg asked him to kind of fund the company to get started up, have the cash to run the data servers, things like that. And he made him the CFO. Zuckerberg, or the CFO, who's played by Andrew Garfield, his name is Eduardo Saverin. Saverin wanted basically to monetize the site with ad revenue. Zuckerberg didn't really want that, which is surprising because Facebook, as you know, obviously moved to an ad-based model down the road. But this is back in 2004. And Zuckerberg was like, no, absolutely don't want that. And over time, that just got into so much tension that Zuckerberg ended up cutting Saverin out of the company by diluting his shares, which is basically a way of saying, oh, you don't have as much stake in the company, this is all you're getting, and I overrule you, basically. And for Zuckerberg, it wasn't really a money issue. He never really wanted the money at that point. Obviously, that changed on the road, but he wanted that control, and he liked having the power over everyone else. And the movie ends with him getting a business card from another kind of venture capitalist guy, Sean Parker, that said, and Zuckerberg's business card said, "I'm CEO, bitch." And it showed that Zuckerberg was more interested in the power that he could wield versus the cash that he could take in. I think people are more drawn. I mean, money is nice, but at the end of the day, that money can buy power, or you can also just get power outright. And I think people really enjoy that kind of sense that they're in control, to the point where they can kick their best friend out, and make really damaging relationships. So that's one thing. I think people are kind of corrupted by power as well. They're just power. We're always power hungry. We like being the bigger guy. The movie is really good. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. But it's a really good kind of look at how power corrupts people as well.
Yeah, I'll keep mine short because I think we're almost out of time here. But I agree with everything that Blake said. And capitalism necessarily is not what corrupts people. While it is a competitive model, I think that can create some divisiveness. Ideally, you hope that humans are compassionate. That's not always the case, but generally we hope that's the case. And I think that can be solved by a culture and education, which are two notably separate things from capitalism. So capitalism in some sort of moderation, with some sort of management, like we talked about, with antitrust laws and things like that, and a support system for people that's focused on, a multiple bottom line rather than profit. There's this idea of the B Corp, which is triple bottom line. So people, the environment, and profit are its three main factors, and it does everything with equal accordance to each of those three things. And so like models like that, I think, are really, really powerful because they fill capitalism's weaknesses.
Okay. Thank you guys. Yeah, I think I'm gonna call it. I know some of you guys have other things to do, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you for working out with your schedules. Thank you for making this happen, and thank you for just giving us your information and helping us out. So you're welcome to leave if you have to go. Okay. So thank you all for watching. Again, we thank all of our guys for coming out and talking to us. Make sure you check out this video, check out our other videos, and keep an eye out for our next videos. We're definitely going to continue this of just talking about very different social issues that are going on in our world. And we'll see you guys next time.